To be honest, I got interested in exploring dungeons, attics, and abandoned mines because I believe in legends about ghosts, monsters, and radioactive mutants. But when I got into the company of diggers, I realized that almost all of those stories are fantasies. And what's more, they are told by people who have never been to such places. The diggers themselves don't believe in monsters. Above all, abandoned places are full of dangers. You can get lost, seriously injured, or find yourself under a rubble. Of course, I also had lost faith in the supernatural, but I wasn't disappointed in being a digger. After visiting a couple of places and seeing lots of interesting things that are usually hidden from sight, I became addicted. For a long time, I didn't expect to encounter something inexplicable, but my company and I still ran into it. We encountered the enormous freak while exploring an unfinished subway line. It was our last shared adventure. The line was supposed to open 30 years ago. It was under active construction, but in the end, the authorities pretended that the project never existed. This is not a reason for conspiracy theories. A lot of projects don't get finished. Usually, the reason for this is the trivial lack of funding, rather than the fact that the workers dug out some ancient cemetery and died of a curse, or accidentally got through a portal to another world. Nevertheless, such legends have always existed. The subway we went down was also the source of stories. People said that there was a creature from another dimension. Crap, that's what I thought. That's what we all thought when we snuck down there. Getting to the unfinished line was very difficult. All the exterior descents that were once used by the workers weren't just closed, but poured with concrete. The only way to enter the abandoned track was through the tunnel of the operating station. Nowadays, there are lots of cameras, so it was essential to have acquaintances in the subway who could turn a blind eye to the fact that a few people had jumped onto the tracks and disappeared into the tunnel. We had such a contact. I think he personally told my friend Daniel about the secret passage and even charged him a certain amount of cash. All that mattered was to do it quickly. Ray, Daniel, and I dressed in work overalls so as not to attract attention. As soon as the train passed, we quickly made our way down to the tracks and hurried to hide in the darkness. The fork in the tunnel was 500 meters away. It was obvious at once which track was abandoned. The closed tunnel wasn't hung with wires, and the rails were old. We managed to enter the high archway before the next train passed. It was a long walk before we reached the first abandoned station. We were definitely not the first visitors to this place. Everything was covered in paint. Other diggers had left graffiti, their names, and dates. Anyway, it was pretty clean out there. My friends and I climbed onto the platform and scattered around. I was interested in the inscriptions. Ray liked to look for things from the past, and Daniel was just looking for something else to climb into. He found a low passageway, beyond which there were steps down, all covered with granite stones. We didn't expect to find anything particularly interesting, but when we went downstairs, we saw an unlocked door, behind which was a kind of warehouse of lost things. That was what Ray called it. His eyes sparkled because he loved to collect finds and trophies. It was a whole room in which there were all kinds of stuff on tables, in cabinets, and on shelves. Flashlights, helmets, boots, and tools were all arranged according to their likeness. It was a real museum of diggers and workers. There were old helmets, brass flashlights, and tin containers in which workers used to carry their lunches. There were also modern things, backpacks, gasometers, cell phones.
Where did all this come from?
I asked.
I don't know. Probably somebody made a collection of the lost things.
Ray suggested.
This is nonsense,
I said.
Who could lose their tools or their shoes? And if they did, Why didn't they come back for them? Why didn't the others carry it all? Henry, wrap it up.
Danny told me irritably.
You're at it again.
He went on to say that I was always insinuating that there was something otherworldly in the abandoned places. I hadn't done anything like that in years, though. I really thought this warehouse was a strange place. It looked like the lair of a mad burglar who caught lost people and made them strip down to their underwear.
Then tell me, where did all this come from?
I got angry.
No, I don't want to bother you. Make up your own story about a maniac who lives here, kills diggers, and collects their belongings. Now, we'll go further and see their naked bodies hanging on iron hooks.
Daniel mocked. He kept trying to bully me. It was his bad temper.
Guys, that's enough.
Ray interjected.
Look for yourself. A lot of things are broken and spoiled. Maybe there's a tradition of taking an old tool and leaving it in this room.
Ray's words seemed logical to me. Sometimes, diggers set up sacred places in abandoned locations. For example, we saw a wall mangled with empty cigarette packages in an abandoned naval base. After leaving the warehouse of lost things, we explored a system of corridors, empty spaces, and tiny rooms. Going down another set of stairs, we discovered that the lower level was damp. Water was oozing from the ceilings and cracks in the walls. It could have been flooded a long time ago, but apparently the pumps of the groundwater were still working properly. In addition to the sound of the water dripping, I distinctly heard someone else's footsteps nearby. It was as if someone was walking in parallel corridors behind the walls. Someone was shuffling, scraping stones with his feet, slapping puddles. I purposely ignored it all, so as not to give Daniel a reason to roll his eyes. Still, I was creeped out. It was hard to get that weird warehouse out of my head. Guys, stop, Ray said in a whisper. Daniel and I stopped and looked at him. In the light of the lantern, his face seemed pale as a sheet.
What happened?
I asked, thinking that my friend was ill. Did you see it just now? Ray continued to whisper. Saw what? Daniel wanted to get on the road as quickly as possible. We went past the hall with the pillars now. Ray pressed himself against the wall as if he were hiding. Did you see anything in there? It seemed to me that there was someone inside. Huge, pale, with long legs and arms.
Wait, who are you describing now?
Danny interrupted him.
I don't know. It seemed that I saw someone. He flashed between the columns.
With a shiver in his voice, Ray said.
Are you sure you didn't see anyone there? I heard footsteps.
I admitted.
There must be another man walking here. Not a man,
my friend objected.
People can't be so huge. He arched his back so as not to touch the ceiling. Oh, come on.
Daniel started to whine.
Stop joking. We're not kids anymore. I swear to you guys.
It didn't sound like Ray was trying to pull a prank on us. He was scared himself.
Maybe I was imagining things, but I'm telling you what I saw. Let's go back together and take a look.
I was ready to check out the hall with the columns. I wondered what my friend might have mistaken for a huge monster. It could have been, for example, a tall, white sculpture. Where on earth had it come from? On an unfinished line? Frankly speaking, I had no ideas. Daniel didn't want to go back.
Perhaps we should first find the second station and then go to the dead end to look at the place where the work ended. Why don't we take a good look at your monster on the way back?
He said. I nodded, and Ray also agreed, but reluctantly. He seemed to be frightened, and he wanted to finish our journey as soon as possible. We walked for a long time along the railroad tracks. First, the rails broke off, and then so did the ties. The mud squelched under our feet. We looked into every opening and door that came our way. Daniel was in too much of a hurry, stepping ahead of us, without looking under his feet. I noticed a blackening gap in his path. Danny kept stepping into it. I ran up from behind and grabbed him by the collar when he had already put his foot over the hole. He almost fell down. I saved him.
Whoa!
He exhaled.
I saw it myself at the last moment.
That was Daniel's style. He'd never admit that he couldn't have done it without someone else's help. Still, he thanked me for backing him up. We began to examine the pit. It was a big hole, as deep as a well, and the flashlights couldn't reach the bottom. Ray took a couple of glow sticks out of his jacket, broke them, and threw them into the hole. What we saw at the bottom made us dumbfounded. A pile of bones and human skulls covered the ground. The bones were polished to a shine as if they'd been nibbled, and the skulls were baring their teeth in the blue light, staring at us with empty eye sockets.
Guys, let's get out of here.
Ray said.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I agreed, and only Daniel rolled with laughter.
You should have seen your faces. Guys, don't you understand? It's all a sham. I had suspected this from the very beginning, and now everything is finally clear to me. First, the warehouse. Then Ray saw some kind of monster, a rubber one, I guess. Now, these bones. It's a scare room for diggers. I'm sure there are cameras everywhere to monitor our reactions. That subway worker I arranged with. That's probably...
Daniel didn't have time to finish. We all went silent at once and stood still when we saw him. It wasn't a rubber costume. In the depths of the tunnel where we came from, a naked humanoid creature of incredible size was walking around. It moved about on powerful half-curved legs, leaning forward and arching its back. It had huge clawed hands, a round bald head, and a wide muzzle-like mouth. The huge creature twitched its head and breathed noisily as if sniffing the air. When it turned its face toward us, I was tempted to turn off the flashlight, but there was no need to do so. Apparently, the creature was blind since it had no eyes, and the top of its skull was white and flat, with only 2 holes, nostrils, and a toothy grin below. The creature couldn't see us, but it must have been quite good at navigating in the dark by smell, sounds, or even vibrations, like snakes. My friends and I seemed to know what to do, and just stood still until the creature disappeared into one of the passageways. It didn't notice us. After standing in silence for a while longer, we slowly approached each other. There was a great temptation to say to Daniel,
"Have you seen that sham? Do you find it funny?"
But I decided not to do that. There was no time to fight. We were all scared to death, and we all wanted to get out unscathed. "Stay quiet," said Ray. He was the calmest and most reasonable of us.
"Did you notice that the creature was blind? Still, we've made a lot of noise here. It knows we're here, and it's probably looking for us. We have to go back slowly and silently." "What the hell is that?"
Daniel was shaking.
"It mustn't exist in nature."
I hit his shoulder to bring him to his senses, though I was terrified myself.
"Daniel, listen, it doesn't matter. We'll think about it when we get out of here. The main thing now is to leave before we get eaten."
Daniel refused to believe it.
"What makes you think it's going to eat us? It might just be curious."
"Doesn't the pit of bones mean anything to you?" Ray whispered. "Food is very rare here. This monster won't let us leave. Have you seen a single rat? Let's think about how we act."
Seems that even though the creature is blind, it's not stupid at all. It has a separate storage room for the belongings of its victims, and there's a pit for the garbage.
I shared this thought with my friends. We talked as quietly as we could, almost pressing our faces together.
"We should cover ourselves in the mud,"
Daniel said. Because of our strained relationship, I habitually thought he was talking nonsense, but then I realized that this was a sober thought. If the creature is oriented by smell, then we must smell like the environment. We coated our hands, clothes, faces, and heads. Now it was time to walk back. How difficult it was to sneak silently, having so many rocks underfoot. It was as if all of us had become synchronized and, without further words, we all did the same thing. We walked to the rhythm of the water dripping. When hearing the heavy footsteps, we immediately froze and stood still until the footsteps receded. But no matter how good we were, it didn't guarantee our salvation. A huge monster, bent in half, crawled out of a corridor as we walked through the tunnel. We didn't expect to be caught and stood apart. It was just lucky enough to bump into us. I stood there, unmoving. Seeing both my friends, the ugly pale creature wandered between us, sucking in air, sniffing, dripping saliva on the floor. I stared at it and was chilled from head to toe. The creature was about 3 meters tall, so it walked bent over to avoid hitting the ceilings and the low passageways. The dungeons didn't seem to be its natural environment. Where had it come from? Massive muscles protruded beneath its skin, its backbone bulging like a ridge. It sniffed and stretched its snout to Ray. My friend all tensed and squeezed. His lips trembled when the toothy creature came close to him and gave a greedy cry. I was ready to rush to Ray, but Daniel, who was looking at me, slightly shook his head.
Don't make too much noise.
The creature poked its muzzle into Ray's face, smeared it with saliva, and realized that the prey was right in front of it. Powerful clawed hands grabbed our friend and sharply dragged him into the darkness.
Guys!
Ray shouted. It was the last word he shouted before he was dragged down the stairs. Without thinking, I rushed out of my place, but Danny caught my arm and pulled me back.
Stop,
he said.
You'll never make it. Did you see it? It's huge. It'll do the same to you. Don't go in there. We can't help Ray.
I was twitching, trying to pull away. It was hysterical. I wanted to save my friend, and I didn't think it would cost me my life, while Daniel tried to talk some sense into me.
He will die,
I said, no longer rushing up the stairs. I realized now that it was probably impossible to help our friend, but it was hard for me to give up and move on.
Let's get out of here. We have to save ourselves.
Daniel persuaded me.
We can't help him. Let's go.
He released my hand and silently staggered on. I followed him, hearing the shrieks of my friends somewhere below. They were screams of pain, and there were sounds of flesh and muscle being torn, and bones being crunched. It was the voice of my friend being torn and eaten alive, while I was getting away from that place. I convinced myself it was the right thing to do. I thought that once we got upstairs, we would call for help, but it was clear that soon there would be no one left to save. Ray, my friend, we'd known each other for over 5 years, and that's how it ended. Whatever it may sound, we took advantage of the time our friend screamed. We wanted to survive, so we almost ran when Ray shrieked somewhere behind us, and when he fell silent, we walked slowly. Ray didn't suffer for too long. Soon his scream stopped, and I thought it was more likely that he'd passed away. The silence made my stomach chill. Then, somewhere in the darkness, I heard footsteps again. The creature began to prowl the corridors. It knew that there was more prey to be caught. Daniel dropped quietly to his knees and began to cover himself in the dirt. That's right, Ray was the least messed up of all of us. Maybe that's why the underground dweller attacked him. I decided to do the same and got down on my knees. Unfortunately, I did it too sharply. There was a broken bottle, and I hit my knee right on the sharp glass. A long shard stuck in my leg. I put my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. Daniel looked at me as if saying,
"How could you screw up like that?"
I got up, trying not to pay attention to the pain, but it was too bad. Still, we had to keep going. In the corridors and in the aisles, I could hear rustling, teeth clacking, and heavy stomping. I walked slowly, trying not to bend my injured leg. Daniel wasn't going to waste the time. He had gone 20 meters ahead of me. I tried to catch up with him, but it was impossible. Maybe he didn't want to walk next to me on purpose. There was glass sticking out of my knee, and the wound was bleeding. I don't know how that creature found us again. I doubt it could have smelled my wound, since its face was all smeared with blood when it appeared before us in the tunnel. We were not so far from the exit, and there it was again, huge and pale. Daniel turned to me and froze. We looked at each other as if saying goodbye. The creature was moving toward us. It could have dragged one or even two of us at once. The huge monster opened its mouth, bloody saliva oozing onto the rails. It stood between us. I held my breath. being so quiet and still that my fingers didn't even tremble. I turned into a statue. Meanwhile, Daniel leaned slowly to the ground for some reason and picked up a pebble. What was he up to? I was afraid for him, thinking that he was going to throw a stone at the creature. That didn't make any sense, but that's not what Daniel was up to. He swung and threw the stone in my direction, right under my feet, and then turned away. Was he ashamed to look at me? God, what had he done? He threw the pebble under my feet so that the bloodthirsty creature, hearing the sound, would lunge at me. Daniel cowardly sacrificed me to save himself. The creature snapped its teeth quite close. I closed my eyes as Ray had done before he was dragged away. I was about to be grabbed and torn apart in the dark. A man I considered a friend had betrayed me. We didn't always get along well, but we were friends. I thought of the people who had returned from dangerous adventures after losing comrades. Maybe some of them had sacrificed friends too, in their risky moments. They just never talked about it. I was sure those were the last thoughts in my head. Punch! A cry of terror.
Henry! Help me! Henry!
I opened my eyes. Daniel was being dragged with the back of his head over rocks and ties. His body was tossing from side to side. The pale monster dragged its prey to where we had been walking for so long. Daniel gave himself away as he picked up the pebble. The traitor. But I felt sorry for him. No one deserves such a horrible death. I made it to the exit alone. No one caught up with me. Everything was over. I walked up to the platform, covered in mud, with a bloody leg. People were staring at me. As I walked up the escalator, I realized how long it would take me to get over the shock. I realized that all that happened had possibly done irreparable damage to my psyche. I thought about Ray, who had innocently died on an unfinished line. I thought about Daniel, whom I had known for so many years. Also, I imagined how that ugly dungeon dweller would nibble and dump their bones into the pit and add their belongings to the collection. And I also thought of the man who had allowed us to sneak onto the abandoned line. The subway worker, who was sitting in front of the monitor, didn't pay attention as the three diggers descended from the platform and disappeared into the tunnel. Did he know about the creature that lived in the tunnel? Then why does he let people go down there? Is he feeding it on purpose? Bastard. I will never do it again.